Hello and welcome to Function One TV. I'm Mark Mitchelson, a senior consultant with Function One in the Web Experience Management practice. This presentation is a high-level educational overview of web page performance. I find this topic is commonly overlooked on many projects. In the next 20 minutes, I'll be covering some high-level research on consumer expectations, how fast pages improve conversion rates and online loyalty. I'll also sift through a brief history of best practice and what should be part of all your websites today. And I'll wrap up with some highlights on some great open source tools or services that you can use to measure your sites and projects going forward. Along the way, I'll also share some experiences that I've had trying to provide fast loading pages. We're all consumers of the web. And as consumers, we demand engaging, relevant content and a seamless user experience. And a key part to that user experience is to have pages and links displayed quickly. So when is it quick enough? And you can't just shoot for the moon, as high speed comes with a cost. Well, Forrester Research and others have tried to answer this and found almost 50% of users expect leading pages to load within 2 to 3 seconds. Longer than that, and they start to see a fall off of 40% of the users considering moving on to different and most likely competitive sites. The web is ubiquitous. More importantly, online loyalty is directly tied to page speed. Most telling, a poor online experience will even trickle down to the brick and mortar presence. We as consumers expect all our devices to provide that same rich, fast experience. Fast pages are so important that even Google and other search providers are incorporating page speed in their search algorithms. Slow loading pages have a direct business impact on the bottom line. Amazon research shows for every 1 second delay, conversion rates drop by 7%. Walmart has shown it gains a 1% revenue increase for every 100 milliseconds of page speed improvement. So where are we at today? Well, unfortunately I can't say we're doing all that well. The median time for an e-commerce page to load is over twice as slow as consumers expect. And again, this reduces online satisfaction, loyalty, and in the end, sales. And it's not just e-commerce sites that are slow, it's all classes of sites. So, what's behind the slow loading pages? Well, to begin to answer that, we need to understand some of the fundamentals of what makes up a web page. As an example, we'll take a look at the function 1 responsive. Function 1 responsive homepage. On the left, we see the homepage. It's comprised of roughly 40 different requests and elements. These include the HTML, the CSS, JavaScript, some images, some other stuff. Key characteristics to note: the page is static. There's, as I mentioned, 40 requests that are bouncing back and forth between the client and the hosting environment, and the total size of all the elements on the page are under a meg. This page performs well. On the right-hand side shows a representation of those requests bouncing between the consumer and the hosting environment. Many of those requests are filled in parallel based on the browser, so that reduces and different example I pulled for this presentation I would call a more typical dynamic page. A different example I pulled for this presentation I would call a more typical dynamic page. Here we have a page that's a little over 5 megs. It has 101 different elements and loads enough to use in about 6.5 seconds. So what do? If we go by the consumer research, most sites are failing to meet expectations. I don't know how many times I've been approached by site owners and marketing just wanting it fixed. It's a web page. Just fix it. Web traffic is going up, satisfaction ratings are going down. We need to address it now. But then there's never a budget for this, and no one knows where to start. And unfortunately, it's not a straightforward fix, or at least it hadn't been. So a little history on this and my interactions. Prior to 2010, I ran an internet team running over 60 different internet sites. My team was focused on infrastructure and backend code, and as traffic increased or features expanded, we would throw more money into bigger servers, faster networks, and revised backend systems. To address this, we scheduled incremental hosting updates almost every year to try to meet this demand. So following this model from 2002 to 10, we were able to meet demand, but it wasn't at a sustainable pace. We did get some breaks. Around 2008, content delivery networks, or CDNs, became popular. Now, CDN provides what's called edge caching, which in a sense moves your website content closer to the consumer. It offloads that load that's typically tied directly to your hosting environment and gets pushed off to these CDNs. It is a costly solution, but can substantially lighten loads and the demand on the hosting infrastructure and greatly improve page performance. For me, the CDNs lowered our server upgrade cycle from 2 to 4 years, and our reduction in the projected hosting budget alone paid for the CDN service. But even with the CDN savior, as time progressed, our traffic continued to explode, as well as our pages tripled in size and complexity. And those past saviors were no longer good enough. And then we also had the chairman come to us and say, I want a Subsecond homepage. Luckily for us, it was just around the time Steve Souders at Yahoo presented his findings on common causes of slow loading web pages. And he quickly released 2 important books, at least important for me and my team: HighPerformance Websites and Even Faster Websites. And he said some pretty revolutionary things at the time. Like, most of us were focusing on the wrong things. Through his research at Yahoo, he found great savings in fixing common inefficiencies impacting the client side. And page performance was largely due in part to too many asynchronous requests, lack of compression, poor understanding of how HTML and CSS impact the browser and DOM rendering at the browser level, and missing caching opportunities. And along with those books, Steve also released an easy-to-use web page audit tool called YSlow. YSlow offered a simple page performance grading system and a list of actionable recommendations based on the findings of the tool. In my use at the time, we held a simple POC against what we saw as critical pages that we needed to address the performance on and increase the performance of those pages by 200 to 300%. If you're just getting into page performance, this is a great way to start, find some targeted pages, and validate the approach, and come up with a cost justification. For IT hosting and infrastructure owners, this was great news. The responsibility of faster pages was no longer just a function of IT, but now also fell across the shoulders of everyone, including the markup developers and even marketing with the type of content and external links placed on the page. The base YSlow principles, or recommendations, are relatively unchanged since the initial release. Many of these recommendations are now markup best practice with a focus on improving browser efficiencies. This is a high-level list of many of them, such as moving your JavaScript to the bottom of the page where you can, avoiding iframes, removing broken links, and others to improve caching and compression. But progress hasn't stopped there with the drive for responsive and adaptive sites, as well as new technologies for dynamic content and rich media. The push for common code supporting all devices is adding complexity and code load. If performance isn't top of mind, any progress will slip. And that's what we're seeing. Now as sites are refactored and new responsive sites launched, you're seeing only 20% of those new sites loading in under 3 seconds. And what's unexpected is many of those new sites still don't follow the base YSlow recommendations. On a side note, I'll also state that there's a common thread for those successful sites that they all average a page size of under 1 megabyte. And that 1 megabyte target is important to consider when year over year pages are getting larger. This is primarily due to the larger media files aimed at a richer user experience, but pages are also growing due to the larger responsive CSS and supporting JavaScript making its way onto the page. With this in mind, I have some additional recommendations. First being test your markup early. It's very efficient to correct issues early in the development cycle, then wait towards the end. Review large CSS and JavaScript libraries for any unused code. Make sure that JavaScript is always at the bottom and external if possible. Avoid having images in file formats and sizes that are beyond what you expect your customers to really need. Avoid image scaling through the markup. If you need it, look towards a service to provide that function. Try to minimize your domain requests. And then, again, if you can try to keep the size of your average page under a meg, you'll find a great savings there. So how do you check on your sites today and then monitor work coming in going forward? And I have 4 recommendations here. My first recommendation is YSlow. It's supported by most browsers. You get a simple letter grade. It's shared across multiple developer groups and is recognized as one of the leaders as far as reporting of performance. It also provides some nice, simple to use analysis tools. The next is webpagetest.org, which is my favorite tool. It's a free open source tool. It provides many of the same features as YSlow, but provides a greater depth of information, such as shown here, how the page is rendered over time. Can provide very similar recommendations as YSlow, but perhaps a slightly deeper dive into some of the AJAX requests that might be going on, and I find it extremely useful. This is another view of the webpagetest.org. This is a waterfall view of the page components and where they're loading, how they load, and the memory utilization on the browser as the page is being rendered. And this view is common across most of the tools, some form of this, but I like this version. Most browsers also include a lightweight page analysis tool under their development tools. This is an example of the Chrome Developer Tool plugin. An advantage of this over something else is that it might already be installed on your machines. It can analyze your local environment if you're not on a network. Very similar to YSlow, but again, it might already be installed, and you can get a quick snapshot of where your work is today. And lastly, I've been using Page Speed Insights from Google recently, and found that it provides a number of good recommendations that are different than the other three products I just mentioned. The one thing I would recommend that these tools do change over time, so make sure that if you're using something that you try to use a couple different things before you finally sign off on your sites or your projects. Not all tools do everything, so it is good to have a few different ones in your toolbox. To wrap this up, I have some final thoughts. Set page performance as a requirement for all web projects. This includes new templates, major feature releases, as well as a full redesign. Begin testing early. It's always simpler to make changes early in the development cycle. Understand the trade-offs of new functionality versus the time it takes to load a page. You might find that committed consumers are more accepting of a slow page if it offers bountiful information, has rich functionality, or is deeply embedded in your site. If they're fully engaged, a 3-second target might not make as much sense to them. If you don't know, ask your customers. And after you finish up listening to me, go out and run your site against something like webpagetest.org, YSlow, or one of the other tools I mentioned, and see where you currently stand. I want to thank you for tuning into this Function 1 TV presentation. I hope you've come away with some choice nuggets of information. For this and other presentations, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn for more insights into the world of enterprise technology. And again, I'm Mark Mitchelson, and you can reach me at mark@function1.com. Thank you.